Today in this video, I'm going to shed light on a subject that many find obscure, and I'm going to do it with a light that I'm sure has never been shown to you before. You see, I'm here to talk to you about depression and that apathy that leaves those who suffer from it without strength. But I'm not here to talk to you about sadness, nor about a lack of willpower, because that would be like staying on the surface of the information or just looking at what's visible from the outside. You see, no. Imagine you have a state-of-the-art electric car, a true gem of engineering. You get into your car, sit behind the wheel, start the engine, and press the accelerator all the way down because you're in a hurry. You have to get to an important place where people are waiting for you, but the car doesn't move an inch. You look at the dashboard and there's the harsh reality. Your car's battery is at 1%. Would you call your car lazy? Would you yell at it, asking what's wrong, why it doesn't feel like going anywhere? Obviously you wouldn't. And you wouldn't do it because you know that the car completely lacks the necessary physical energy needed to transform your internal intention to go somewhere into actual physical movement. Well, I really want you to understand that the complex brain of someone suffering from deep depression or chronic apathy goes through exactly the same kind of mechanical failure you just experienced with your car. For many decades now, medicine has told us the story that depression is a chemical imbalance, that you are missing a vital piece called serotonin, and that with a chemical patch, a little pill, everything gets fixed. But today we know that this is just like trying to fix a car with a dead battery by simply putting a new air freshener on the rear view mirror. That's the comparison. And the real problem is much deeper than just a lack of serotonin. It's a real blackout in the personal power plant of the person suffering from it. And it's important that you really understand this. Depression is not a mood, it's a deficit, a thermodynamic deficit. To put it in a different way, your body has essentially decided that it lacks enough vital energy to keep all the lights on, and as a result, it has started systematically cutting off the power supply to the various internal departments it considers to be non-essential luxuries, such as a sense of profound joy, personal motivation, or even basic human enthusiasm. System A, thank you, has entered a forced energy-saving mode, a kind of biological work to rule because its cellular battery is running on empty. And for you to understand why I say that your sadness or the sadness of someone suffering from this situation has a voltage, I need to introduce you to two men who are truly turning official science on its head. On one hand, I'd like you to meet Dr. Chris Palmer. Christopher Palmer is a distinguished professor at Harvard Medical School and currently heads the extensive postgraduate department at McLean Hospital. But far beyond all of these impressive professional titles and academic achievements, Chris is a dedicated psychiatrist who has spent many decades prescribing various medications that often only serve to temporarily numb the underlying symptoms. And he felt frustrated because he saw that his patients weren't truly healing and that all he was really achieving was helping them survive. Until one day, he decided to stop looking at psychology books and instead began to examine what was really happening with the brain's essential fuel. And that's where my other great role model comes into play, a figure who to me is almost like a science hero, Dr. Douglas Wallace. Douglas is not just a scientist, he's a visionary who dared to question the central dogma of modern biology when no one else would. Just imagine it. More than 40 years ago, when the entire scientific community was absolutely obsessed with the cell nucleus and everyone was convinced that in those 23 pairs of chromosomes we inherit from our parents, our fate or salvation was inevitably written. But Wallace decided to look elsewhere and focused on those thousands of tiny engines living outside the nucleus, and he discovered something that completely changed the history of medicine. He discovered that these structures, each one of them, have their own DNA. In other words, just so you understand, he discovered that they have independent genetic material, a kind of instruction manual that is unique and private, which each of us inherits, exclusively from our mothers. This discovery allowed Wallace to understand that above all, we are a constant flow of energy, and through his decades of research at elite institutions like the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Wallace demonstrated that medicine had been, for over a century, making a monumental error in its approach. While the official system insisted on the anatomical model, that is, obsessively searching for which part of the car is broken, whether it's the heart, the liver, or the brain, Wallace instead proposed the bioenergetic model. And what he explains to us through his theory is that if the energy production within those microscopic cellular powerhouses experiences even a slight decline below a critical level, then the most energy-intensive and demanding organ in your entire body will be the very first to begin to exhibit the signs of functional failure. And as you already know, your brain is the most voracious consumer of energy you have. That's why Wallace maintains, thank you, he steadfastly maintains and advocates the belief that 90% of the various diseases that cause us so much fear and anxiety in our modern world today, ranging from Alzheimer's to that heavy gray apathy that might leave you feeling completely paralyzed and stuck on your living room couch, do not actually arise from some unfortunate or catastrophic malfunction of your nuclear genes, but rather from an internal cellular power plant that has gradually lost the vital strength needed to keep the bright light of your consciousness burning. Now, to make this a bit more enjoyable, I'd like you to imagine these two geniuses, Palmer and Wallace, meeting here in my laboratory. And you, imagine Palmer with that look of someone who has lived a long life and has seen much human suffering at Harvard, saying to his friend Wallace, "Douglas, my patients they are completely and utterly drained, and it is not simply that they do not want to do anything, it is that they truly can't. Because they have lost that vibrant, shining sparkle in their eyes, that essential spark that makes you jump out of bed every morning. So, what exactly should we do about this?" And Wallace responds with the deep calmness of someone who has finally found the root of it all and says, "Look, Chris, it is just that their internal batteries are failing. What you call depression. Wallace says, I call it a simple, fundamental lack of electron flow. It's very simple. If the voltage drops, the mind shuts down. And pay attention to this, the mind shuts down. But what exactly is it that shuts down? Where are those batteries that Wallace is talking about? And to understand this, we have to go down to the deepest level of our biology. And here I want you to visualize this with me. You see, deep inside each and every one of our individual cells, and every single one of your cells too, there are these incredibly tiny structures, very small indeed, that in our science textbooks we call mitochondria. And you should try to think of them as thousands of busy little dynamos, constantly working to power everything you do. The kind like the ones bicycles have on the wheel to power the light, and their only job in this world is to produce the currency with which you can then buy every second of your life. In other words, to make ATP. If you have thousands of these dynamos spinning at full capacity in each of your neurons, your mind shines. But if those little batteries get dirty, your voltage drops. And this is where the concept of the cold kitchen comes in. Think of your brain as if it were the kitchen of a great restaurant. Feelings of profound joy or deep serenity are the most exquisite and delicate gourmet dishes that the master chef wants to prepare. But to cook them properly, it is absolutely obvious that you need fire, and that essential fire is ATP. If there is no fire burning on the stove, it simply doesn't matter if you have the finest and most expensive ingredients found anywhere in the world, because you won't be able to cook up any joy in a completely cold and lifeless kitchen environment. And here comes a fascinating scientific concept that might really catch your attention. It actually turns out that the emotion of sadness has a specific physical voltage that we can accurately measure in a laboratory setting. In this field, the engineering of your body gives us a lesson in physics that is absolutely mind-blowing. Because you see, you might say to me, Jose Maria, if my batteries are at 1%, how am I supposed to move to recharge them? This is a vicious circle. Well, this is where a phenomenon comes into play that in engineering we call piezoelectricity. The bones found throughout your body are not actually just rigid structural support beams. These bones are intricately composed of mineralized crystals known as hydroxyapatite, and these specific crystals possess a truly fascinating and almost magical physical property. Whenever you press down on them, or when you squeeze them mechanically just by walking or moving around, it actually turns out that they will automatically generate a measurable electric voltage on their own. And this is very interesting because if you think about it calmly, you'll realize it breaks the myth of, I'll wait until I feel like it. I'm referring to that famous saying that many people have used or we've heard, I don't walk because I don't have energy. But the reality is, thank you. You generate energy because you walk. Well, when you put your foot on the ground, the pressure on your bones acts like the click of a kitchen lighter. The piezoelectric spark that is produced is what sends the wake-up signal to your mitochondria so they come out of inactivity. And this is a reality that for physics is almost a principle. It is movement that generates the current, not the other way around. Each one of us is like a dynamo flashlight. If we don't turn the crank, we don't produce light. And now that we've reached this point, I have to introduce you to something that is vital for you to understand. In order to regain your sovereignty, you need to know about it, the Rh2. And this Rh2 was born in one of the most rigorous biochemistry laboratories of the early 20th century. And the man behind this measurement was the American biochemist William Mansfield Clark. In the 1920s, Clark was searching for a way to measure the pressure of electrons in a similar manner, just as pH measures the concentration of protons. And so, he proposed the term Rh2, which, put simply, is the tool used to measure relative oxidation reduction potential. In other words, it describes the negative logarithm of the partial pressure of hydrogen gas that would be in equilibrium with the system. I know it sounds complicated, doesn't it? But no, it's not complicated at all. I'm going to make it very simple for you. Think of Rh2 as the instrument that measures how much impact force your electrons have. Try to imagine your tiny biological cells as a crowded room where a very big and lively party is currently taking place. At that party, the electrons are the guests who bring the joy and the music. In other words, the energy. Oxidation is the smoke and the trash that starts to pile up at the party. And when a scientist says that Rh2 measures hydrogen pressure, what they're really measuring is how many guests, that is, how many electrons are present, pushing to get the smoke out of the room. If the Rh2 is low, for example 22, then it means there is a lot of pressure from the guests. There are so many electrons that the smoke simply has no place in the room, so it's clean and the party keeps going strong. That means you're full of energy and youthful. But if the RH2 is high, for example 30 or more, it means the pressure from the guests has dropped and the smoke, or in other words oxidation, is gaining ground and starting to suffocate everyone. In these cases, the party dies down, you're oxidized, and you run out of energy. To put it quite simply and directly, RH2 serves as a clear indicator of whether your body currently has the necessary physical strength and vitality to push the waste out, or if the rust is ultimately winning the battle because of a significant lack of internal pressure and force. With that clarified, now I'm going to go back to what I was telling you, because it turns out things have changed since Clark discovered RH2. Nowadays, if we talk about RH2 applied to health and cellular vitality, it is essential to mention the French hydrologist Louis-Claude Vincent. I've already talked to you about him in other videos. In the 1950s, Vincent took Clark's principles and developed what we now know as Vincent's Bioelectronics, or BEV. And it was Vincent who took RH2 out of the laboratory test tubes and applied it to the biological field, that is, to blood, urine, and saliva. And to help you visualize all of this more easily, William Mansfield Clark was the one who designed the scale and the physics of the instrument, in other words, the ruler. And Louis-Claude Vincent was the one who turned it on. And he understood that this scale served to measure whether the boiler of a living being, that is, whether its mitochondria, were clean or filled with oxidative soot. Well, the reality is that RH2 is ultimately a fascinating tool, because it provides us with the ability to assign a highly precise and specific numerical value to electronic pressure. As I was telling you, it measures sadness. And if the value is very high, the system is losing electrons at a high rate. In other words, it is oxidizing. And if it is low, the system has a good reserve of energy to fight against wear and tear. I would really like for you to try not to view this as merely a dull and uninteresting figure on a graph. Instead, I want you to visualize it as a critical pressure gauge. One of those small ones, like little clocks with a needle, that measure the pressure inside a steam boiler or a heating system. You've probably seen them. When that gauge shows a very high RH2, what it's telling us is that there is too much oxidative pressure inside your cells. In that specific case, think about what happened to the boiler. What has actually occurred to it is that it has filled up with thick black smoke that doesn't let you see anything and threatens to blow everything up. And in that state of high pressure, your mitochondria, those little beams of light that produce your energy, are faced with a critical engineering dilemma. An excessively high RH2 level is very much like having your engine oil completely filled with sharp metal shavings. If you don't clean that oil and reduce the oxidation, no matter how much energy you generate, the engine will keep seizing up. And here you can see the mitochondrion. It's a very intelligent tool. If it senses when the RH2 pressure becomes excessively high because of constant ongoing stress, a consistently poor diet, or a chronic lack of rest, what the body actually does is make a radical, highly technical decision, and it does this specifically to save your life. It essentially enters into what I like to call a protective biological work-to-rule strike, slowing everything down to prevent a total system failure. And I'm sure you know what a work-to-rule strike is. That is precisely when the employees within a company decide to adhere to every single official regulation so strictly that in actual practice, the entire operation eventually grinds to a complete standstill. Well, your tiny biological mitochondria do precisely the same sort of thing. They stop producing energy so that you can be happy, so that you feel like going out or get excited about a project, and instead they devote themselves to, they direct every single ounce of their energy and effort to just one thing: producing free radicals in order to defend themselves from all that intense internal pressure. What I'm telling you is a pure and simple survival maneuver, which is essentially a desperate attempt at preservation, where your power plant completely shuts down and extinguishes the lights of consciousness. And here you'll see exactly what I mean by the lights of consciousness, which, as I mentioned before, is what you commonly call joy or motivation. They shut them off in order to prevent the entire biological system from collapsing and burning out from within. This is why I tell you that depression, if you look at it from a biophysical perspective, is actually a defense mechanism of your own body. And you might ask me, how can you be so sure about what you're telling me? Well, look, I can tell you this because cutting-edge science, led by Dr. Robert Naviaux at the University of California, has discovered what he calls the cellular danger response. Naviaux has shown that our mitochondria are not just silent batteries. He has discovered that they are sensors, and not only that, but they are ultra-sensitive sensors. And when they detect that the internal pressure, that is the RH2 I've been telling you about, is too high, or that the environment is hostile, what they do is simply change their function. As I was saying, they stop producing energy for the outside and retreat into a true defensive stronghold. Think about it with this technical analogy. Imagine the electrical panel in your own house. In it, in your house, you have a contracted power limit, but suddenly you forget and turn on the oven, the washing machine, the air conditioner, the iron, and the television. What happens then? Well, the circuit breaker trips. The system cuts the power. It does this automatically to prevent the wires from burning and the house from catching fire. It's a protection system that we all know. Now, apply that protection system to the body. It turns out that your brain is the most expensive organ to maintain. It uses up 20% of all your energy, and within that budget, it just so happens that joy, enthusiasm, and motivation are the appliances that consume the most. They are considered a kind of biological luxury, and when your mitochondria detect that there lacks sufficient power or energy available, your brain's internal circuit breaker will trip. This is the body's way of protecting itself. Like I was mentioning earlier, depression is essentially a biological switch that is automatically triggered for our own evolutionary safety. And when depression or apathy appears it's not that the system is punishing those who suffer from it with sadness, no. What it's actually doing is implementing an emergency budget cut. That's the way you should see it. The system shuts off the decorative lighting, in this case joy, and it does so to ensure that essential services like the heart or lungs keep functioning. And this is why I tell you that depression, if you look at it from a purely biophysical perspective, it is not some kind of inherent factory defect, nor is it a clinical disease. Instead, it is a remarkably sophisticated and brilliant defense mechanism of your body, specifically designed to prevent a complete and total systemic collapse. As Dr. Douglas Wallace rightly says, consciousness and mood are properties that only emerge when there is a surplus of energy, and if there is no surplus, there is no party. So when someone finds themselves feeling lost in the darkness, it is certainly not because they are inherently weak. Rather, it is because their internal system is remarkably and incredibly intelligent, that it prefers to gradually dim the lights before its delicate circuits completely burn out. Someone suffering from depression is actually not psychologically unwell. What happens is that their engines have lowered their revolutions to a minimum so that the boiler doesn't explode. Their mitochondria are on a work-to-rule strike. And what they perceive as a lack of will to live is technically just a go-slow strike by their own cells. You must understand this well, and all of this is happening because the internal environment they live in is far too acidic and much too oxidized. This biological state creates a difficult situation where the cells simply cannot function at their normal, healthy pace anymore. It is a fundamental shift in how their bodies operate on a microscopic level. Let me put it another way. That persistent sadness, that grayness that settles in and doesn't go away even when circumstances change, is the symptom of a power plant that's been operating in emergency mode chronically. It's a system that, faced with a threat that doesn't go away, and that threat could be chemical, physical, or emotional, has decided to keep the lights off to protect the entire structure. And here there's something vital to distinguish. A momentary sadness due to a loss or a rough patch, that's a human natural response. But when that feeling becomes a habitual state, what you're experiencing is a technical decision made by your mitochondria. According to Dr. Robert Naviaux, the main problem is not just entering that danger mode, but rather that the system eventually loses its ability to get out of it again. And it's very important to understand this correctly. The cells remain trapped in the bunker because they're convinced that the electrical storm, the one I talked about in the previous video, is still out there, even though, in reality, the day is magnificent and the sun is shining brightly. And this is where it happens. And so, when the biological strike of the mitochondria becomes indefinite and the energy budget is frozen, therefore, it's not that the person suffering from this has stopped being a cheerful person. It's that subcentral has decided that in order to prevent burning out from within, joy is not a priority in this state of emergency. And fully grasping and understanding this concept is the crucial first step on your journey to finally ceasing to blame yourself for everything, and to finally start thoroughly cleaning every bit of all that stubborn soot from the burners once and for all. Because once you know that someone suffering from depression or apathy is neither weak nor lazy, but simply has a dirty boiler and the burners turned off, then let's now analyze what needs to be done to regain control. And the mission is not to force yourself to be cheerful, among other things, because this is simply impossible if there is no energy. The mission is to give the mitochondria what they need to start producing light again. Now listen closely. Today, I'm not going to give you any instant magical cure for all your problems. What I'm going to do instead is carefully explain the process of how you can rebuild and repair the underlying infrastructure, so that later on it will be much easier for you to find the right emotional solution. And you'll see that it's a very simple thing. My approach is to explain to you how to carry out the rescue, technical rescue of you from me or from the power plant. If a car's battery is dead, no matter how much you talk to the car, encourage it, or change its oil, that car is not going to start. Well, these measures I'm going to give you are the real jumper cables so that the system can have voltage again. Once there's voltage, then and only then will the person be able to start therapy, make decisions, or get their life back. In other words, this is the first step, the initial step to be able to get out. And here, the first thing you need to achieve in this first step, in this first phase, is to lower the RH2 pressure. And for that, I need to talk to you about water and raw salt. And no, not for hydration, but for conductivity. I mentioned earlier that RH2 is like the pressure gauge on a boiler that measures oxidation. In other words, the internal smoke you have in your body. And if that value is through the roof, then the beams of light, that is your mitochondria, will remain on strike to avoid exploding. So it needs to be lowered. the pressure, and to achieve that, you have to start by being very strict about what you drink, because we are a liquid semiconductor. And for the electricity generated by your bones, the piezoelectricity I mentioned, to be able to travel to your brain, the water in your cells has to be an efficient conductor of electricity. And to achieve this, it's important to always look for spring water with low mineralization. But that's not enough. Just that, pay attention to this as well, because you have to bring that water back to life. You need to give it the mineralization it needs so it can regain its conductivity. And for this, you have to add a few grams of unrefined salt. And for this, not just any refined supermarket salt will do, because that white salt they sell in supermarkets is pure sodium. What we need are the electrolytes that our body recognizes, and those are the ones that remain in that salt. Unrefined salt from natural salt flats, where the sun and wind have done all the drying work. And in this case, I'm talking about Celtic salt or Brittany salt or salts from equivalent salt flats. I'm only talking about that unrefined salt because it's the one that will benefit the body. Magnesium and potassium. They act as the keys that open or will open the flow of gas in the burners of the mitochondria. Without those minerals, water has no conductivity and becomes an insulator. And with them, it turns out that water becomes a true conductor of life. This allows your mitochondria to start producing ATP again, and as a result, lowers the pressure in the boiler. Carefully adding spring water mixed with sea salt is like replacing the corroded, rusty electrical wiring in an old house with modern, high-speed fiber optic cables. By doing this, you manage to significantly enhance and optimize the data transfer rate of your entire nervous system. But in addition to that precise hydration, mitochondria also need nature's wireless charger, sunlight. And what I'm telling you isn't so you can get a tan, look good, and seem like you just came back from the beach. No, this is the foundation of photobiomodulation. In other words, seek the light of dawn or the light of dusk. Is it red or infrared light that penetrates? It is found in tissues and directly activates mitochondrial motors. You see, that light, which, as I tell you, appears mainly at dawn and dusk, activates a specific protein in the mitochondria called cytochrome C, oxidase. And that is literally the finger that presses the on in the electron transport chain. If you don't have light frequency, the motor simply tanks. It stalls, and therefore photobiomodulation is not an option. It is a genuine biological necessity to be able to restart the engines. And here I'll tell you what you've heard me say in other videos. If you live in an area where sunlight is scarce, there are other solutions. First, you have infrared lamps. And here it's important to make a clarification. You shouldn't think of the infrared lamp as a luxury, but rather as a true light supplement. Just as if you don't eat well, you end up taking a vitamin. If you don't have sunlight, you need to supplement the lack of those photons your mitochondria are waiting for in order to function. Especially if you want to get out of a situation like this. And for a lamp to serve as that finger pressing the on button of cytochrome C oxidase, it needs to emit within a very specific range called the therapeutic spectrum. And here, keep in mind that you will come across two types of infrared lamps. And pay attention to what I'm about to tell you so you can choose correctly the one you need, because you'll see. On one hand, there is red light at 160 nanometers or nanometers. And this light is a short wave light that stays on the surface, on the skin, in the outermost tissue. It is a truly remarkable and effective light source for physical regeneration. But for those struggling with deep feelings of depression or a sense of apathy, we really need to go much deeper. And then there is what is commonly called the near-infrared lamp, which is capable of reaching a wavelength of 850 nanometers. This specific wavelength is the essential key to the entire process. And this frequency, the one from this lamp, is invisible to the human eye, but it is capable of penetrating bones and reaching brain tissue. This is the one that truly interacts with the structured water in your cells and pushes your mitochondria to start up again. And here, let me clarify something for you. Keep in mind that light does not travel in a straight line. It travels in waves, like the waves of the sea, and the nanometer measures the distance between one wave and another, something like the stride of light. Well then, in the case of lamps, we are also talking about two different types of strides. First, there is the 660 nanometer stride. This is a visible red light that is exactly the right size to collide with the receptors in your skin and repair them. And this red at 660 nanometers is what is called a short stride and is almost completely absorbed by the hemoglobin in the blood and the melanin in the skin. So you understand, it's like trying to throw a rubber ball through a wall. It bounces off or gets stuck. For a wound on the skin, it's absolutely great, but for the brain's power plant, it doesn't work because it doesn't reach it. And second, there is the 850 nanometer stride. This is an invisible light that is infrared, and it has a longer and more powerful stride and is capable of passing through your muscles and bones to reach your internal organs. This near-infrared frequency has the exact wavelength to slip between the cells and the water in the tissues without being absorbed. Is it capable of passing through the skull bone? Thank you. And reach the cerebral cortex. This right here is the essential key that perfectly fits into the intricate lock of the deepest parts of the mitochondria. If the essential key, that is the specific stride of the light, fails to measure precisely and exactly those nanometers, then it will simply not be able to fit properly into your mitochondria's receptor, and the biological engine will not be able to start up. If what we want is to wake up a dormant brain, we need a lamp engineered with the precision to emit at the peak of 850 nanometers. This is primarily because that specific frequency is the only one that has the necessary authorization and physical clearance to pass through your skull and reach your internal neurons in a direct manner. To give you an example, this is like tuning into a radio station. If you move the dial even a little, all you end up hearing is static. But at 850 nanometers, the signal comes through cleanly. Cytochrome C oxidase receives it, and the mitochondrial engine finally starts up again. But there's one more thing. It's not enough just to have that light. Additionally, it's important that it has power, that is, irradiance, because, as you can understand, it's useless to have the correct frequency if the intensity is so weak that it doesn't reach the target. If you don't keep that in mind, in the end, it could be like trying to light up the bottom of a swimming pool with a match. What you need is a spotlight with enough strength to push those photons downward. So look for therapeutic-grade LED panels and those old-fashioned red filament bulbs. Remember, these coiled structures generate a lot of heat, which is far infrared, but very little intensity at the frequencies that activate cytochrome C oxidase. Modern LED panels allow you to receive a massive dose of startup photons without burning your skin. Very important. And just so you understand, here's another example. It's like comparing a high-pressure water jet, which is the LED, to a mist of vapor, which is the incandescent. For someone with apathy or depression, knowing that there is a physical key that can penetrate bone and ignite their biological engine, this is incredibly powerful information, and today I'm giving it to you. Because all of this stops being something emotional and becomes real hardware maintenance that you can do yourself. And that's the first step toward recovery. But pay attention, because there are more ways besides the ones I just mentioned, like infrared lamps. And in case you don't have access to sunlight or an infrared lamp, for example, saunas can also help. But not just any sauna. Only near-infrared or NIR saunas are useful. These are usually cabins with special bulbs that don't heat the air as much, but bombard you with that penetrating light. These are the ones that work for the mitochondrial activation protocol needed by someone experiencing anxiety, sadness, or depression. But it's not just this. There's also cold, like a 1-minute cold shower. It's not a punishment, it's a true forced reset of the system, because cold activates what we call brown fat, which is a tissue made entirely of pure mitochondria. And when the body feels cold, and that cold is extreme, the mitochondria receive a top priority command. Burn fat and generate heat, in other words, ATP. So taking a cold shower is like giving a push to a car going downhill so that the engine starts by compression. This is one more solution, but now let's move on to the last point, the third point of the protocol. Don't forget the importance of electrons with their negative charge. You should walk barefoot on the ground whenever possible, and here you'll see why. Understand me well, I'm not inviting you to what some people call connecting with Mother Earth in a mystical sense. No. What I'm doing is talking to you about physics, about surfaces. Depression, and especially prolonged depression, generates an excess of positive charge. In other words, an excess of oxidation. And grounding, making contact with the earth, is the simplest way to empty that electrical ashtray that burdens someone going through a situation like this. When you touch the ground, electrons, which have a negative charge, enter your body to neutralize the RHALP. What you achieve with this discharge of pressure is that the mitochondria sense that the danger has passed and that you can come out of the state of alert. And here is an alternative solution. If you live on a high floor in the center of a city, or you don't have a park nearby, you also have another option. There are grounding mats and also grounding sheets that you can use in your bed. These are technical devices that are connected to your home's ground outlet and allow you to discharge that static and receive electrons while you sleep or while you work. This is an engineering solution to a modern isolation problem, nothing more than that. Well then, now you have the way, but of course we already know each other, and I can also imagine what you're probably thinking. And that after everything that has happened to someone who suffers from depression or apathy, you might be thinking that saying drinking salt water, getting some sun, and walking barefoot on the earth will solve the situation. It might sound like an oversimplified solution, even an insult. But here, please, pay attention to this. I'm not telling you that you need to have the strength to do it. What I'm telling you is that before anything else, what needs to be done is to repair the wiring. This isn't about willpower, this is about physics. I'm not looking for the person to feel better the day after they start. What I'm aiming for is for their cells to stop being in survival mode, so that finally they can find that they have the necessary voltage to actually start fighting. Because as I said before, everything is clean. In their DNA, there's nothing left to do but dust off, remove the soot. And this is something essential in order to get out of a state of apathy or depression. And I would like you to take this to heart. Someone who suffers from these situations is not a patient with a mysterious illness. It's a person just like you or me who needs to be helped. To discover that the apathy is a technical problem of electrical supply. He or she is not broken, and their blueprint for perfect health is still there. written in their DNA, with the only problem being that they didn't have or don't have enough voltage to read it. And if that's your case from now on or from today, when you feel like you can't go on, don't blame yourself. Understand that your battery is simply at 1% and start taking care of it. Just as you wouldn't get mad at your car for not starting, don't get mad at yourself. Give yourself light. Ground yourself, whether it's out in nature or with your grounding mat. Give yourself spring water with good quality salt and let your engines light up your life again. But get ready, because if today we've understood why the light goes out, in the next video, I'm going to talk to you about what happens when the light is there, but nevertheless, you can't see anything because the glass has fogged up. In the next video, I'm going to dive right into brain fog and into what medicine labels as ADHD, which is nothing more than attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. Do you feel like you're thinking through a curtain of smoke? That your ideas just slip through your brain without leaving a trace? Today they tell us that ADHD, it's a factory defect. But I'm going to show you that it's not a lack of intelligence, but once again, a problem of blocked conductivity. Think of a state-of-the-art television with a screen covered in greasy smudges. The image is there, it's perfect on the inside, but all you see is something blurry. In the next video, I'm going to reveal to you who the metallic squatter is that's dirtying up your processor. And most importantly of all, how we're going to completely and thoroughly wipe it clean, so your mind can become a perfectly clear and transparent crystal once again. If you liked the video and think it could be useful to others, you would be doing me a big favor if you share it, because, you see, you'll help me spread knowledge so that more people stop being patients and become the owners of their own lives again. I invite you to keep moving forward, always forward. And I'll be reading your comments.